where the Good Morning Uganda team left it at Fairway Hotel this morning. Ruben Impima Chibirango and the team, thank you so much for your special Friday that you normally give to the people of Uganda and to Good Morning Uganda specifically. We thank you so much. Now we also thank Cleveland High, Cleveland Hill, Dan Boarding Primary School, our sponsors. Take your children there, let them go study. It's a very good school, and of course it gives the best to our children. Now on Pan-African Friday this morning, of course we come back to talk about the issues on the continent and the issues that concern us. But of course, joining me in studios today, of course, the common suspects and the guests. I'll begin with my guest today, this morning, Mr. Dan Rugarama. He's the chairman for the Pan-African Movement Uganda chapter. Ndugu Rugarama, karibu. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, comrade, and my dear brothers. And to you all viewers, thank you so much, and welcome to this program. I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much. Dan joins us. He's from the Pan-African Movement Uganda chapter. He joins us today to talk about the issues, of course, that concern us on the continent here. But just before we get into issues, Ndugu Mtuta, welcome and say good morning to the people.
Yes, good morning, Ugandans and those watching us from across the country and the globe, and welcome to the program.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Mututa, I will start with you. As you take your greeting to the people, of course, we get into issues. We've just held elections on the continent. And like you know, last year we had about 22 or 23 elections on the continent amidst COVID on the continent of Africa. And of course, the countries that came in the middle of COVID at that time were starting with, I think, Burundi in May, even when we had elections in January, February, March. But May coming all through to where Uganda got it. We were in the heat of elections in a very bad pandemic year. But even this year, of course, we have elections that are happening on the continent. And this particular month that we are going on with, we've had 3 elections. I'll start with you on that, of course, the elections that we had in Benin, in Chad, and in Djibouti.
Yeah, well, good morning, dear viewer, and it's a pleasure having you watch us on this Friday. It's a pleasure also joining the team. Yeah, but getting to the issue, looking at the elections and just most recent elections on the continent, because there's something that actually that was weird about the election, in the sense that let's look at the results. One, we find that the late Idris Dabi actually they have put down the results, but indications were that he was winning over 80%. When you go to the situation in Djibouti, actually Ismail is actually also won with about 92 or 90 something plus percent. Now the situation also in Benin is not any different. So you realize that this is not really, it doesn't reflect exactly what is on ground. The other aspect that comes out here clearly in this particular election we have, especially in China and Russia, is that we see the opposition boycotted, like actually in Djibouti. The main opposition parties boycotted, and there was one Ismail Farah who came out. He said, look here, the man cannot go and oppose, and he got less than 2% of the votes. So in Chad, there was actually an opposition candidate, where we find that he was attacked, and in that process of escaping, the mother and 4 of his children were killed, like Yaladola. So that was the situation in the election we just had. Now, I think this is really a departure from what we see in Uganda here, because I was told. The Swahili will say, "Ustajabu ya Musa kayaona ya Farao." It's like, you know, during that time, Israelis were actually living in Egypt. Some of them were saying, look here, no, I think we are suffering. Somebody was saying, if you think you are suffering here, then think of the situation in Egypt. So to those who really think that in Uganda it's a dictatorship, elections are bad, now they can compare notes with some of these countries that kind of know that actually as a country we are really moved a step. Now the other aspect that comes out in this, we see leaders that have tempered have changed the constitution. In short, the first elections were in 1996. Actually, Idris' first election was held in 1996. So he was supposed to have left office in after 2006. 2006, but the constitution was amended, and the term limits were actually suspended. The same in Djibouti. When we see Ismail Gulay, the current president, entered power or assumed office in 1999, actually taking over from his uncle. And also they had a 6-year term, which was reduced to 5, but again, the term limits were suspended. So those are the countries. I believe they have not managed well the suspension of their term limits. Then lastly, we see the issue of Islam also coming up. Very, very key that, of course, in Djibouti, the Muslim factor is key here, and also in Chad, actually, the Muslim factor is actually playing out so much so that even the conflict there is coming from mishandling of issues of Israel.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And Nduguru Garama, I'll just come to you and talk about these elections. Remember, Uganda is a very unique country in a way. We do certain things our own way. For example, we just went to an election in January, you remember very well, and it was a general election that was all-inclusive, from the councils at village levels up to presidency. Not so many countries in Africa can actually organize a general election like the one that we do. You'll notice that in many countries, when they have the presidential elections, then after some time, they have the national assemblies, after some time, they have the municipal elections, or they actually have different years. Libya, for example, had the time we're having our general elections, I think they're having their municipal elections. To talk about a country like Benin, for example, I think in 2019, they were having their national assembly elections. Then, of course, 2 years later, they come and do. These are the elections. But yet again, you find that there are lots of problems in managing these processes. What do you think we are not doing right as a continent in Ndugu Rugarama that we possibly need to learn from one another or make it better for the good of African democracies?
Comrade Yagenda and our dear viewers, the concept of democracy is very disturbing, especially if you want to get to the bottom of its core. The cost of democracy is not cheap, and you will realize that when you don't, like in majority Africa, we have been colonized, and we assume that we got independence. Of course, we can debate as to whether the kind of independence we have is the true independence that gives us the ability to do things correctly. For instance, we grapple with the issue of organizing free and fair elections, mainly because, and that was your question, mainly because the kind of democracy we talk about is actually not ours. When something is not yours and you are being tested against something that you didn't originate, the values around it become a problem. Our economies are also in trouble. So much so that at one time, don't get surprised that in DRC, they delayed to have elections, and the argument was that there was no money. Now, you can argue that surely and honestly, somebody was lying through all this, because the entire DRC not to have money to organize an election that can be an argument. But at the end of the day, when you go into the internal dynamics of Democratic Republic of Congo, you realize that that economy is virtually not their economy. And maybe it is also true that they didn't have the money. That is another thing. Now, looking at these recent concluded elections in Benin, in Chad, in Djibouti, like Comrade Akol was saying, there is, even where there is money to organize these elections, there is always a disease that has not been cured in a majority of the African democracies. And this disease is selfishness, that I must organize an election to win. And if I don't win, no any other person wins, I must win. Now, I don't know how we're going to overcome that. But like we say in the Pan-African movement, we don't agonize, we keep organizing. Because at the same time, we have got very successful examples on the African continent. We have the case of Tanzania. We have many cases in West Africa itself, Botswana. You know, you can go on and on. South Africa, and of course, I can even say in Uganda, although some people have their own views, but I think we have come a long way, because we all know, and Comrade, you touched Uganda aspect, so you permit me also say this. We all know some time back situations in our own country whereby a candidate would be arrested on a roadblock.
On a number of times.
Yes. And sometimes you are going even to present your papers, then the security come and they grab the nomination forms with all your academic credentials and they go away. We are also aware of situations whereby...
That's what dominated the 1980 elections most.
So at the end of the day, with the few problems that we are left with, because I'm not carrying out an argument that we have reached a level whereby we can say we have gotten it. No, we still have challenges. But I think we have moved we have taken very serious steps in democratization of our elections. So as in a way of summarizing on this, and this is not easily seen with the naked eye. I will tell you that we also have another bigger invisible component controlling our elections. And probably these elections are even not for us. Because West Africa, French West Africa, you can imagine even the statement here, French West Africa, why must it be that? But that's what it is, because they were the colonizers. Whenever there are elections, somebody not easily seen is behind the curtains and has got interest in the outcome of that election. If at all, whether it is shabbily or whatever nature of organization, but somebody is looking at the outcome, somebody is actually controlling the process itself. And if it turns out not as he wanted, then something happens like we have seen in Chad. I would conclude by saying on this that I wouldn't be surprised, for instance, that the elections in Chad and the aftermath of the elections and the death of Comrade Dabi could be the handwork and the brainwork of the conceptual West. I leave it at that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ndugu Rugarama. We'll talk about, of course, the situation in Chad and of course, the aftermath of the election and then what is happening there. I first wanted us to go through these elections that we had on the continent. Ndugu Mututa, picking it up from where Ndugu Rugarama leaves it, you also noticed that Chad, Benin rather, had the elections, the National Assembly elections in 2019. Yeah. And they were regarded as a sham election because only 27% showed up. They looked at it as an election that was intended to have a legislature to just rubber stamp Teflon's government in a way, where only loyal parties to the establishment, the regime, were allowed to field candidates and do all the things. The situation, like I said, is different from our situation here. Here you have President Museveni running on an NRM ticket and several members of parliament across the country. Then you have one in the opposition, NUP, Chagulanyi, and several others, whatever they are. The other countries, it's actually a different one. Just looking at the election that had happened earlier on in 2019 and its aftermath, what would you look at for this election that they've just also had? Do we have these elections to just sanitize our processes, or we really have them to mean business and say we're having these elections as part of our democracies to see how to foster a way forward for our countries?
And I think Ndugu Galama put it rightly, that this election there's a cost attached to it, both with or without democracy, in other words. But again, when you look at these elections, to a greater extent, they are not reflecting the democratic development this continent is going through. We seem to move 2 steps forward, then we move another 1 step backwards. But this has been as a result of the selfishness of the political systems or the leaders that we are having on the continent. Because these things, I don't know what people want to achieve at the end of it, but I think if we had the serenity and the conscience that will tell us what we can do as leaders of this continent, but also the people of the continent, because some of the times we, the voters, the people, have given the leaders the chance to do that. Because if we are not going to allow them to do that, of course an argument will come up, say they have the institutions, they have the money, they have the power, so we are left powerless, which is not also true, because we have seen in countries where people have stood up for their rights, other than later on people who demonstrate and destroy things. People still, we can have positive engagement. Leaders are not dinosaurs. Leaders are also part of us. So when you look at the Benin situation, because the system was such that a person would say the earlier elections were only meant to help the president and his core team to have their term back in office, but also these people are not electing themselves. There are people who are electing them. So the problem is not then our leaders only, because they are part of the system where we belong. But the other thing is that this thing of democracy, I think, has been Africa has not had a contribution in this type of democracy. That we have been given a dummy in which to operate. You have to elect, and if you are electing, you are doing this and that, and then sometimes we find it very difficult to have these elections. And there is also a dangerous trend that is coming up on the African continent, where we're having a lot of people who position themselves in the opposition and telling their voters to boycott these elections. That, for example, in Djibouti, I think they've been boycotting most of the time from 1999 when the Ismail Omar became the president of that country. In 2016, the opposition boycotted the elections. Said we are not going to participate, and even this time they boycotted until this man Zakaria, I think, gets 400. Is it 4,000? And the president wins with about 16,000. So then you can boycott, fine, but what is, like people have been talking of plan B. What is your plan B when you boycott these elections? Because the person in power will win and eventually will lead the country. And for you will continue. So opposition also need to have benchmark the activities, so that we need to have a positive engagement, and the leaders should also be open to discussion and to reconciliation, because if we don't do that, why is it that Africa, as of today, is the biggest consumer of the Western guns and gun power? We are a poor continent, as they assume, but we are the biggest customer of their guns. Why? Because
gun business is an African thing.
Exactly,
yes,
because we cannot sit down and talk. And because we fail to, which was African actually, because Africans, even when we had disagreements, people will sit down and those differences will be resolved. And the biggest problem is that even when we have our small problems here, we are running to the Western capitals to solve our problems. Now, these Western capitals are the ones who are supplying us with these guns. Why should it that when I have a problem with President Museveni in Uganda, why can't I go to Tanzania? Why can't I go call Kenyatta or someone and say, look, my brother is becoming a problem here. How do we handle this? And the leader should also be open and able to listen to their own than going to Washington.
And I think you provoke something very important, and and I'll pose this question to all of you. I'll start with you still. The discussion on these foreign democracies has actually tarried with us. And we don't seem to be having an alternative to these democracies, because we keep saying and regurgitating the same thing. This is foreign democracy. It is not part of us. We have no place in this democracy. But we don't seem to have an alternative democracy in a way. And now you bring in a very important and good argument that we talk about elections here, but you'll notice that until the European Union comes out, until some other foreigners come out to actually give credibility or to shun the processes, if AU came out to say maybe this is a free and fair process, nobody would actually adhere to that. If the EAC, for example, in the region, we've had an election here, and then maybe if the Secretariat at Arusha comes out to say anything, or if it is ECOWAS in West Africa, or if it is SADC, or it is all these regional bodies that we have, nobody would respect their positions until the European Union comes out to say something. And I think we have elapsed in that. But yet again, the most important thing here is, when we talk about these issues, we are this glorious continent. We are this naturally endowed, rich continent. We are, I think, the apple of God's eye until an election comes on the continent. When an election comes, that's when we see things falling apart and everything going bizarre and berserk. What I want you to address me here is the issue that you're just bringing forward here. Is this the Africa that the likes of Joshua Nkomo, that the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, the likes of all these men, is this the Sankaras? Is this the Africa? For example, if Joshua Nkomo came back to Zimbabwe today, would they wish to have that Zimbabwe, or they would rather that they have actually Ian Smith and the Rhodesian government there? If all those people returned to see what is actually happening on the continent, would they say, yes, this is the Africa that we wanted, or something? Because, like you said, or put it right, even the opposition that we have here today, it is once you're opposing, then you have to get allies from the US, you have to have allies from elsewhere to actually help you talk about and discuss your own affairs in the guise of, yet again, being independent. I'll start with you, then come to Ndugu Akol.
Yeah, because the most important thing is that we seem not to have credence, to have trust in our own, that we are looking at someone who is going to help us to achieve this. But you realize that even what we are trying to perpetuate, these people will not understand us. We have also seen that they also have issues with their own systems. Now, if they're having issues with their own system, the other time you had the president of US, the former president, saying, you know, this post office elections, our elections are being rigged, like it is someone coming from somewhere to rig. And by the time he also came on power, you remember people were saying he rigged the election. So their system is even very more obviously bogus. When you can win a popular vote, but you can also lose the electoral vote, which is very complicated to understand for an ordinary person. Now, at the same time, we have also had our issues with the would-be our own system. We have looked at, when you talk of Somalia, when you talk of even Djibouti, when you talk of the Horn of Africa generally, the elections are such that you are basing your system on the clans that are able to elect a leader. Now, there are two systems there. There is the clan system, the traditional system, which was very prominent in the past, but also very effective in having to elect traditional leaders. But then trying to fuse the two, the Western system and the local system, becomes a problem. Which one works well? Are you going to use the local people to elect the traditional leaders, who definitely will be again transformed into political leaders, or you are going to have a different system, a double system, which every system will produce its own results at the end? But that notwithstanding, I think Africa needed to come up with a peculiar system, with its own system on how to achieve the leadership. We have seen even within the traditional institutions, where sometimes you have leaders who are elected, we are having issues, which means that we may blame the West, of course, because of the type of education and the exposure they have given to people. You also realize that most of the founding fathers of the African democracies, the Kwame Nkrumah, the others, were all products of the Western education. So there was something that was implanted in these people. And you know, their political motivation was as a result of the oppression that they were, and segregation that they were subjected to when they were studying in these capitals. So when they came back, theirs was, the problem was the Muzungu, that the West had marginalized them, and the West was mistreating them. So I think there we missed the point, that the way we started our relationship and building our democracies was to cut ourselves from the rest of the West, and start our own system, which was basically, because when you look at most of these gentlemen, when they started there, including Chad, you know, Tombo Baye was a man who believed in the African cause. You could be surprised that even when he had issues with the northern of the country, because most of these were Muslims, and you know, somehow, like Bwana Cole put it, the Islamic factor, the Arabic factor, because last time we discussed there's a difference between Islam as a religion
and Islam as a culture.
Yes, and the Arabic culture in the Muslim faction. So they didn't look at the African. Even if we speak today, there are countries that are of the Arabic origin in Africa who don't still believe that they're Africans. I mean, you go to
Morocco is one of those.
Exactly.
They don't think they are. Actually, it was recently when they wanted to host the World Cup.
Exactly.
Right, to claim and say, give it to us as Africans. But yes, they
it's
don't
not
want to claim to be
Africa.
African.
They have applied more than thrice to join the European Union.
Exactly.
And
to
they
get the European
rejected
Union.
them.
Yes. So we have all these problems in Africa. So which Africa are we talking about? Now, partly also comes in that the elites of Africa have gone to bed with the Western world because of their consumerism, the culture, and but we have forgotten that even our ancestors had a lot of things that the rest of the world could copy from. I mean, you are talking about a country which collected criminals or people who are running from wherever into a place, and they became a country.
Okay.
You don't expect much from that place, but they can learn from us if we are consolidated. Now, for me, my prayer is that Africans should step back, at least a step,
Okay.
to identify what brings us, what unites us, what is good for us in this global market. Because if we don't have anything to take in this global market, we are going to consume what the global market is
Okay,
offering.
a call and Nduguru Garama, you're still going to respond to the same thing here, but I will just request that we take a break, and when we return from that break, we'll pick it up from there, conclude the recent elections, and of course, pick on another issue that we are discussing today on our Pan-African Friday. We'll take a break and return shortly.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra. Sponsored by Cleveland Hill Day and Boarding Primary School. The Lord is my shepherd.
What does it mean to be closer together? It's taking the last bus home for a surprise visit. Closer together is strangers finding a connection. It's bringing home something much more than a box. It's the warmth of home, or the beginning of something new. There's magic in sharing the things that we love, because it's those things that bring us close together.
Experience 100% 4G speeds across Uganda with the Airtel 4G Pocket Wi-Fi available at 123,000 shillings only. It comes with a backup battery and 15 GB free for 1 month. Visit the nearest Airtel shop, device selling shop, or Airtel online shop. www.airtel.co.ug/broadband-discover. Airtel, the smartphone network.
Introducing Cleveland Hill Day and Boarding Primary School, located in Chebando, Chisalo-Salo, along Bukoto Roundabout, 2 kilometers from Kalere at the Northern Bypass on your way to Chisasi. This is a world-class standard school with the most qualified teachers that will turn your child into a world changer. We have a fully stocked library, a balanced diet for the children, a calm environment suitable for learning, and pocket-friendly school fees. Registration for P1 to P6 is ongoing, and second term is starting on 6th April 2021. Call us on 0774 950 277 or 0705 861 262 for more information. Cleveland Hill Day and Boarding Primary School. The Lord is my shepherd. Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra. Sponsored by Cleveland Hill Day and Boarding Primary School. The Lord is my shepherd.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to come back from that short break. My name is Uganda Semakola Ziksoka, carrying on with the discussion on Pan-African Friday on UBC TV this Friday morning. And of course, thanking Cleveland Hill Primary School in Chisalo-Salo, Chebando. A very good school founded on religious principles by Ndugu Benon Senkusu. It's a very good school, of course, registered and recognized by the Ministry of Education and Sports with the registration number. So you can't go wrong when you take your child to Cleveland Hill Primary School. And of course, thanking everybody out there and making it good. Nduguru Garama, we will return. And of course, I want you to pick it up from where Mututa left it.
We started off with the cost of democracy. And it is my contention that if the democracy is not yours, it is not something you gave birth to, it is very difficult to determine, therefore, its core values. The values will be somewhere else, and the measure, standard measure, used to judge your democracy will always be somewhere else. I will tell you, therefore, that as a consequence, Africa will keep, if we do not work seriously to overturn the trend of events, will keep experiencing and paying a very high cost of a democracy that is not ours. Is China not thriving? Can anybody contend that China, because it has got its own brand of democracy, therefore not democratic? It does not matter how much the Western world has ostracized China, but China has moved on because it has its own brand of democracy. At the attainment of independence of Africa, majority starting with Ghana, I'm told Sudan was the first to get independence on the African continent. There was an attempt, a great attempt. Kwame Nkrumah had a brand, unique brand of democracy that he had introduced in Ghana. Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, the list goes on. But I will tell you that that is not what the conceptual West wants. The pretentious characteristic of the conceptual West about democracy is that they would want you to be as democratic as themselves. But in actual sense, that is not the intention. Why? If that was so, what was the problem of Kwame Nkrumah? Why was it? Because declassified information has it that he was overthrown by CIA and the cahoots. Why was that so? What crime had Kwame Nkrumah committed? Why was he not good for his people? What was the problem of Thomas Sankara? Look at the brand of democracy he had established. Why was he overthrown? Had he overstayed? What was the problem and the brand of democracy?
Because you can't accuse Sankara of overstaying in power.
Absolutely.
You can't say that he overstayed in power.
What had happened to Patrice Lumumba?
Emile Lumumba.
What had happened? That kind and brand of democracy. Therefore, Africa is not short of progressive, pan-African minded leaders who have endeavored to introduce and govern their societies according to extreme African democratic principles. The problem we have is that there are tendencies of those who become more Catholic than the Pope, and they want
holier
to,
than thou.
I'm telling you,
they're more holy than Jesus himself.
and therefore they want, and they have consistently done that, impose their so-called superior. They are suffering from they call themselves supremacists, and I think Africa has been the biggest recipient of supremacist tendencies from the conceptual West. I have argued before, and I will argue again, that I do not consider Libya to have been a dictatorship. I was in Libya myself more than twice. I saw the kind of democracy right from, maybe Ndugu Akol could remember. You remember the RCM, the Revolutionary Committee's movement. What you see here, the RC system
that we had
was actually copied from there. So the society, right from the grassroots, was involved in determining their course, the course of events, and the way they were to be governed. But look, with the interference, the so-called friends of Libya who were meeting in Paris, you can even imagine the venue. The friends of Libya were meeting in Paris. Then now, look at your Libya.
10 years later.
Do we now not need genuine friends of Libya to meet in
Addis
a proper
Ababa,
place
in Dar es Salaam, in
to address
Kampala,
the issues of Libya?
in Tripoli, meeting in Tripoli or Benghazi or Sat or whatever.
There was no civil uprising in Libya. It was a concoction of the conceptual West, Paris, Washington, and these other members, and the intention was to achieve what they are doing right now.
Okay. Well, Ndugu Rugarama, hold it there. Ndugu Akol, because we're running out of time, I will just request that I take you on to the other issue of the crisis. in the Horn of Africa. We have it on the radar here, and then of course now seeing that there was supposed to be an election in Somalia which didn't happen, and now the parliament has actually extended the term of the president and parliament itself another 2 years. The crisis there, when we saw President Farmajo come on, we thought that maybe that transition would actually help the country stabilize, but Farmajo's term ended, and in a bleak way. Look at what is actually happening in Ethiopia. I mean, 2018 when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came, we thought that yes, the situation in Ethiopia would also get there. We saw him get into signing agreements with Eritrea. And then just looking at it, then of course, little did we know that problems would come in Sudan, where we've also now seen, we're trying to see a transition government. And if we don't actually manage the situation ably well as Africa or Africans, then what Nduguru Garama is talking about here, you might have a Sudan that will also carry on like Libya. It might also follow the same path and processes, and look at all those. The crisis now on the radar in the Horn of Africa. Let's analyze that before we jump into the situation in Chad.
Well, I think the situation in the Horn of Africa is an extension of our African continent, because ideally, you think if I've seen Somalia for more than a decade. 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now it's been, and the issue was to pacify peace, to take peace to Mogadishu and the entire Somalia. So would have expected that at the time they were signing off, actually the Addison were signing off, when their deal or their contract is done, or the mission is done, they should, just like we saw when the colonialists were leading in most parts of Africa, there were elections, and people be handed over to a democratically elected government. So in Somalia, I think that is also not auguring well. It doesn't paint a good picture for that country, because ideally the crisis in Somalia was the failure, Siad Barre actually to consolidate the country, because you find that his repressive way or his autocratic rule was not accepted by these other federal states, and that's why after his fall, the country crumbled, disintegrated. And also, this crisis in Somalia was also failure to live within their history, because Somalia was a mandate state to Britain. But even much as it was given as a mandate state to Britain, Britain had what we call British Somali, which is the current Somaliland. And there was also French Somali, which is the current Djibouti. So these were, you find these two entities, Djibouti, French Somalia, which is now Djibouti, and British Somalia, which is now Somaliland, were governed well because they had their colonial masters with them. But then the other rest of Somalia was governed by the Italians. And of course, when the Italians were defeated, just like the Germans, then they had to take over their colonies and given to other colonial masters as mandate states, just like we saw Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, because Tanzania was given to the British, Rwanda and Burundi was given to the Belgians. So the leadership failing to understand that, look here, we were annexed, we were actually brought into a marriage, the rest of Somalia to Somaliland, so that we can form like a federal system. That the existence of that federal system will always be, the mandate of the federal system shall always be renewed every after 10 years through a referendum, when whether you want to stay or not. Just the same thing, Eritrea. Eritrea also was annexed to Ethiopia, and it was after 10 years they hold a referendum whether to stay with Ethiopia or not. But you see, Comrade Haile Selassie just disregarded that and annexed them forcefully. That's why you see that in 1961, the Eritrean War of independence actually begins until 1991. Okay. So these are some of the issues. Then, so the problem of the Horn of Africa is the question of people, the leadership, failing to appreciate and living within their history. Because, you know, like Napoleon used to say, that history is the true philosophy. Is because it tells you where you're coming from, where you are, and where you are supposed to be. So, in a nutshell, therefore, I say that the problems in the Horn of Africa, it's about the leadership that gets into power and they totally forget in a very, very short time of the history of people, the history of their region, and the aspiration.
Ndugu Mututa, like Akol puts it here rightly, we see a problem happening in the region, especially in the Horn of Africa, and we're behaving like sons of the same father, but from different mothers. We tend to think that way, that we all Semakola's children, but then our mothers are actually different. Mine is a mother from Bugisu, maybe yours is a mother from Bwamba, and my mother from... so, but we're sons of the same Semakola from different mothers. When you look at the situation happening, for example, when you go to Ethiopia, Eritrea, you'll notice that when Abiy Ahmed had just come into power in 2018, and you know, he was hailed as a peace ambassador and did things that all of us looked at and said, yes, now look at this country. It's a landlocked country, a very big country, very populated, very strategic, and quite a number of things. And the country that is actually progressing. And of course, also having that history that it's the only African country that, of course, was never colonized, having won that battle with the Battle of Adwa. And very progressive in a way, looking at them, housing actually even the African Union itself, and quite a number of things. When you talk about African history, when you talk about Pan-Africanism, then when you run home to Pan-Africanism, you actually go to Ethiopia. Now, when we saw Abiy Ahmed move on, extending that olive branch and getting into peace with Foch, the other side in Eritrea, then of course we knew that yes, the region is coming together. Look at Kenya, for example. You're looking at Kenya, also with Somalia, the other side, that problem at Jubaland, where Somalia is actually blaming Kenya for perpetrating all these insurgencies in their country. This other side, you have Kenya also that keeps accusing Somalia for all these attacks that keep coming to them in Garissa and quite a number of places. Looking at them, and we're looking at this crisis, and is it a problem that we are failing to identify who our enemy is, that we do not know who to ally with, or what could be happening, especially when you talk about the crisis in the Horn?
I think the crisis in the Horn of Africa, if it is to be fully addressed, we need also to look at the history of that area. Because unlike the rest of Africa, where you have people who moved from one end to another end and settled there and then began life there, the life in the Horn of Africa is first of all hostile. The conditions there are very hostile, and the people who have settled in those areas have also been very hostile. And they have been fights. We have had interstate wars, we have had intrastate wars, and we have had a number of movements of caravans of people coming from elsewhere to settle in that area. But also having the Arab extension, and you realize that the Arabs have fought almost every other time. The clans have fought for land, they have fought for resources because of the harsh conditions that the area is in. So if we and the people who are settling in the Horn of Africa are part of those hostilities that have existed as long as humanity in that area has existed. So if we are to amicably handle that crisis, then we need to look at that history. We also have had the issues of the Italians, I mean the other people. Currently we are also having the interest from other countries. You see Egyptians also attacking them up there, and you see Somalis also getting there. You see, now this wars that have fought between Ethiopia, Eritrea, we have Djibouti, Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan. That strip has had a number of conflicts. Now, you don't expect that these people will just come down and settle and be peaceful. There are local systems, the local governments need to be organized. That these guys need to be organized maybe in blocks, so that these blocks can come together and have one leader. But if that is not addressed, we have seen in Ethiopia that when the current prime minister came on to power, because actually he even is a Nobel Prize winner, peace. But what is happening is contrary to what the man stood for, which means the problem in Africa is not actually maybe the leadership, but the systems through which leaders come to power sometimes make them even to behave worse than those they have replaced. So we now need to look at which systems can be accommodative, that all these warring factions can fit in and agree to work together. Other than that, you empower one group, then the other group goes on offensive or defensive. We have seen this also in Chad, that when the northern is in power, the southern is revolting, and vice versa. We have seen this in the Sudan. So it means that the African Union has a lot of work to do. If we are to achieve peace, it means then we have to go back to the drawing board. That we first of all have to address the ethnicity, the diversity of the continent, especially in these areas where we have a lot of these big groups. So, like in this particular region, we have people who are settlers, who are farmers, but also we have those who are the animal keepers, and these people keep moving, and because the conflicts are also as a result of the resources. So how do we have these people together? Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, all these are the same problems. But also when you look at for example, in Somalia, part of the problems of Farmajo is that he's trying to put up a system which to him is more open, of having one man, one vote, so that we have at the end of it a process producing leaders that represent the people, the constituencies where they come from. But the people there said, no, for us we use it to our clans. The clans will sit down and elect leaders. Then those elected leaders will want to elect other leaders. So now, these systems need to be harmonized so that Africa can move. And if that is done, I think to me, it will be a better system than bringing in an exotic system, which even sometimes people don't understand.
Okay, Nduguru Garama, just finishing on that issue of the Horn of Africa, you'll notice that if you organize a meeting today, a Great Lakes meeting or whatever it is, or IGAD or anything, all these heads of state will come, sit together, dine together, shake hands, take group pictures, and you know, it will seem like it's all fanfare, it's all okay. But yet again, when you get to individual countries, you'll notice that we have these issues running about with us, and in a way, you'll notice that we have so much that binds us together than those that actually divide us. But why aren't we using those opportunities over the things that bring us together, one as Africans, as a people, as communities? Because if you notice, these boundaries that we have, just cross and go to any of our borders. You know, when you get to the border, you tend to forget whether you are in Uganda or you're in Sudan, whether you are in Uganda or you're in Congo, whether you are in Uganda or you're in Kenya, whether you're in Uganda or you're in Tanzania. When you get to the border, that's when you realize Akol is my brother, Mtuta is my brother. But yet again, there are these things that keep dividing us very sharply, and yet the things that bring us together are actually more. What we need to do to see how to run away from the crisis and you know, get to a region that prospers, continues, goes ahead, to bring out that Pan-Africanism that we've always talked about and yearned for, that our forefathers left for us.
If Africa has had problems, including direct physical colonialism, it now has much bigger problems in neocolonialism. I will tell you that there is no way. It is now becoming increasingly difficult, if we do not up our game, for Africa to attain the unity that we so much desire. Why? Ethiopia, for instance, what we have been talking about, having been the headquarters of African Union right from 1963, there is every reason for the conceptual West to destabilize Ethiopia, because it is the rallying force around which African countries gather, debate, discuss, agree, and conceptualize and run visions. If Ethiopia is destabilized, which is in the best interest of the conceptual West anyway, then we are going to get a bad mark, a dent, and our vision is not going to be achieved. That works for the enemy. The strip, the horn of Africa that we were talking about, just look at the Gulf of Eden. Who is in the Gulf of Eden? Why do we have pirates there? We call them pirates. But we have to look at the ships. Who is manning those ships? What are they doing there? They are transiting, they are carrying, what goods are they carrying? Who is doing the fishing there? What is the participation of the Somali people in the Gulf of Eden? The moment we do not get those questions answered correctly, we shall have the problem of persistence of conflicts and an explosion and expression that actually Africans can never live in peace. I will agree with my senior comrade, my senior comrade Rumumba, Professor
Patrice
Rumumba.
Lodge.
He says if there is any given people that have managed to coexist, it is the African people. The rest, the attempts to exist, I mean, look at it. Even with the existence of these geographical boundaries, which were just created by the colonialists, you can see the persistence of the African man to coexist with a brother, a sister across the border. But when you look at the Germans, like Rumumba says, are largely Germans, and they are there in their country, they are Germans. Maybe recently when the Madame started opening for the refugees. If they are French, they are the French. The people who made it even worse, because they were hiding under, they were camouflaging, were the English. They said, okay, we can be together in the European Union. Had they entered, then they ran away. They clearly showed their character that they cannot coexist with any other people. Yeah. But they pretend to show that they can bring others together. Therefore, as far as what we must do as Africans to realize our own independence, our own democracy, our own development, away from the photos we take after conferences, our leaders and that kind of stuff, is that we must emphasize the tenets upon which Pan-Africanism is built. Kwame Nkrumah may be dead. Thomas Sankara may be dead. Patrice Lumumba may be dead. Abdul Gamara may be dead. But I can assure you that they can resurrect in our never die spirit to realize the total integration of the African people on our continent, and a deliberate effort to make sure, however much the enemy wants to come into our circles. Because you see, there are certain things that are not easily seen with the naked eye. That's why are we having coups, for instance, on the African continent. The coups can, in West Africa, I will tell you that in addition to the ever-present, consistent presence of the French, with the desire, for instance, to run away from their own currency, You see, there is this eco currency.
Yes.
You know the eco currency. In a way, the moment the French realized that you were attempting, because by attempting to attain economic independence, you were directly, not even indirectly, you were directly injuring the economic muscle of the French. Which French president was it who was very frank about it? He said, if the French Africa stops what it is giving us, that will be the end of France.
Yes.
I could not have put it any better. My sister here, Chimbohore, the former ambassador of is it Africa to the UN?
The UN, yes.
Has consistently argued, and I agree with her, that Africa is a lifeline to the majority of Europe and even America. China has come in, all right, but you see, Africa is trying to look at who is the better devil. They are all devils, all right, but who is the better devil? Who is giving me infrastructure? You just go to DRC here and see what is happening. Planes dropping in and going outside. But they are they have the heaviest presence of UN on the African continent. Even security is in Congo. What are they protecting? Look at the massacres in DRC. Look at the levels of involvement. No infrastructure, no electricity, no nothing. But UN has got vested interest in that country, and not until, I don't know even when that will happen. And using, of course, their ever formidable Bretton Woods institutions in World Bank and IMF. They have kept Africa under tight grip that we must do everything in our power to extricate ourselves from the shackles that the conceptual West has pressed upon us.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Ndugu Rugarama. And you know, you also bring in something very important here when you talk about the Bretton Woods institutions, of course, the IMF and World Bank, and how they actually set the agenda for us and how they manage our own issues here. But yet again, there is another journalist. He's a journalist, yes, and I think a lawyer also, Tim Howard. He wrote a very good book called Prisoners of Geography, and he talks about the 10 maps that tell you global politics. And you know, when he's talking about the map of Africa specifically, he talks about Africa at its center, and he says in his analysis and of course his research that if you want a stable Africa, then make sure that you stabilize DRC. Once you have a stable DRC, then you can have a stable Africa. But of course, you know, when you look at DRC for all the time it's been there, it's this mineral-rich country that has never actually had a day of stability or anything. Somebody is interested in having DRC as it is because once you let DRC stabilize, then you pave for the rest of Africa. We'll take a break, and of course when we return, we now get into the issues that are happening in Chad, and of course there are very pertinent questions there to talk about Chad. What do you think is next for Chad after President Idris Deby gets to be buried today? He died just a day after, a few days after his re-election to office. And in this century, somebody asks, is it true that a world leader with the caliber or at that caliber of Idris Deby can actually be shot on the front line just like that, and he dies? We're now coming to discuss and talk about the issues of Chad after this break again.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra. Sponsored by Cleveland Hill Day and Boarding Primary School. The Lord is my shepherd.
That's their way of stopping HIV. What about you?
Experience 100% 4G speeds across Uganda with the Airtel 4G Pocket Wi-Fi available at 123,000 shillings only. It comes with a backup battery and 15 GB free for 1 month. Visit the nearest Airtel shop, device selling shop or Airtel online shop. www.airtel.co.ug/broadband